Welcome to One Chapter, One Thought. I'm Pastor Chris from Lincroft Bible Church in New Jersey, and every weekday I read one chapter of the New Testament and offer one brief devotional thought. Today's reading is from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 8. In those days, when again a great crowd had gathered, and they had nothing to eat, he called his disciples to him and said to them, I have compassion on the crowd, because they have been with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. And if I send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on the way. And some of them have come from far away. And his disciples answered him, How can one feed these people with bread here in this desolate place? And he asked them, How many loaves do you have? They said 7. And he directed the crowd to sit on the ground. And he took the 7 loaves, and having given thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples set before the people. And they set them before the crowd. And they had a few small fish. And having blessed them, he said, These also should be set before them. And they ate and were satisfied. And they took up the broken pieces left over, 7 baskets full. And there were about 4,000 people. He sent them away. And immediately he got into the boat and his disciples and went into the district of Dalmanutha. The Pharisees came and began to argue with Jesus, seeking from him a sign from heaven to test him. And he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, Why does this generation seek a sign? Truly, I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation. And he left them, got in the boat again, and went to the other side. Now they had forgotten to bring bread. They only had 1 loaf with them in the boat. And Jesus cautioned them, saying, Watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. And they began discussing with one another the fact that they had no bread. And Jesus, aware of this, said to them, Why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of pieces did you take up? And they said 12. And the 7 for the 4,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up? And they said to him, 7. And he said to them, Do you not yet understand? And they came to Bethsaida, and some people brought to him a blind man and begged him to touch him. And he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. And when he had spit on his eyes and laid his hands on him, he asked him, Do you see anything? And he looked up and said, I see people, but they look like trees walking. Then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again, and he opened his eyes. His sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. And he sent him to his home, saying, Do not even enter the village. And Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way he asked his disciples, Who do you say that I am? And they told him, John the Baptist. And others say, Elijah. And others, one of the prophets. And he asked them, But who do you say that I am? Peter answered him, You are the Christ. And he strictly charged them to tell no one about him. And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he said this plainly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, Get behind me, Satan, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man. And calling the crowd to him with his disciples, he said to them, If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what can a man give in return for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him will the Son of Man also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels. One thought. How should we respond to Jesus when we encounter him? Mark 8 grapples with that question by recounting another feeding story here in verses 1 through 21. Now, earlier in the Gospel, in chapter 6, Jesus fed 5,000, actually probably over that because it said he fed 5,000 men, so there was also probably women and children with them, so you're probably looking at more like Jesus feeding 10,000 people. But now, here, it says he feeds 4,000 people, which quite frankly, compared to the other story, might seem like a little bit of a letdown. So what is the point of including this second feeding story in the gospel? And I think that both feeding stories are doing different things. The first one is really highlighting Jesus' abundant provision and the fact that he is bringing restoration. But here, really, the story is very much focused on the responses that people have to Jesus. So Jesus, again, feeds the people. And right after this feeding, then, in verse 11, there's no real transition word. There's no therefore, there's no because or anything. It just goes right into this sharp break talking about the Pharisees. Jesus feeds the crowd, and then it says, verse 11, the Pharisees began to argue with him, seeking a sign from heaven that they may test him. So I think we see in this abrupt interjection, this focus on the Pharisees, that they have a response to Jesus of judgmental hostility. You know, they come to Jesus and they are arguing with him and they're saying, show us a sign, but Jesus literally has just performed a sign. He's fed 4,000. And these feedings are signs of who he is and what he's come to do. But the Pharisees want no part of Christ. They don't see it. They're rejecting it. They're hostile towards him. And that's, quite frankly, one response that some people have today to Christ as well. They're just very hostile to him. Then as they're leaving the feeding, the disciples forget to bring bread. And Jesus is trying to use this opportunity to teach them and warn them about the false teaching of the Pharisees and Herod. And he uses this metaphor of leaven, that if you allow these works-based religions, these different false viewpoints, get into your thinking, it, like yeast, can spread through and infect everything. But the disciples are completely wrapped up with arguing about the fact that they have no food. And Jesus rebukes them. He gets after them, saying, don't you perceive what's going on, right? These feedings, again, these miracles are signs. They're supposed to show us something. They're supposed to show that Jesus is bringing restoration to his people. There's 12 baskets full, probably representing the 12 tribes of Israel. There were 7 baskets full, representing the number of completeness and wholeness. Jesus is like, don't you get it? All of this restoration is happening and you guys are missing the point. You're arguing about, hey, we have nothing to eat. If I just provided for 4,000 and 5,000, don't you think I can provide for you? And so the disciples, their response to Jesus is kind of this friendly dullness. They're just completely oblivious to who Christ is. But the good news, right, in this passage is that Jesus doesn't give up on the disciples, right? The disposition of their heart is still inclined towards Christ, as we see that Peter confesses that Jesus is the Christ later on in the chapter. But, I think that what the passage is getting at here is that the disciples should have known more about Christ than they did, because they had seen his miracles, they had heard his teachings, they should have known more. And I also think that applies to us as well, and I wonder how often we miss out on Jesus' presence and power in our lives because we're just not paying attention. We kind of have a friendly dullness, and yet Jesus never gives up on us. He ends this passage saying, do you not yet understand? And I think in some sense, that's an invitation for us to keep reading the Gospel of Mark, right? You may not get it now, but you don't yet understand it, but you will. So keep reading, keep engaging, and Jesus will reveal himself to us. And so when we feel weak in faith, I think it's an invitation to keep reading, to keep praying, to keep pressing in, and we can come to know Jesus in a deeper way.